Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Levinson. I am the Campaigns Director for In Defense of Animals, and we are so excited to have you here today for our very special webinar on wolves and wild horses. This is all about land, water, and space in the modern West. We have some esteemed special guests to share their thoughts and their field research with you today. And I'll just take a little moment to introduce everyone who's here with us. First, as I mentioned, I'm Lisa Levinson, happy to be your host. We have Mary Easonsey with us from In Defense of Animals. She is going to be chatting with all of you if you're here with us on Zoom and helping with our questions. She's our development specialist. We also have Julia Orr with us. She is our field researcher who specializes in wolves. And we have Janine Dallow, who's also with us today, and she is a wild horse advocate. And each of them will have their opportunity to speak to you. And I'm very excited to be able to present a little bit about In Defense of Animals actions for wolves and for wild horses. So we'll start with that, if that's okay. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll begin. Okay, wonderful. So we'll go ahead and do our little slideshow here. Fantastic. So first of all, we are so excited about this, connecting wolves and wild horses. Both of them are impacted by our use of the land, especially with ranching. So starting with what you've got for today, we're going to be presenting some advocacy tools for protecting wolves and wild horses. And I'll begin with some information about our campaigns and what we've been doing behind the scenes and in front of the scenes for wolves and wild horses. And then we'll have our wolf field researcher, Julia Orr, share about investigations, reports, and also conclusions from time in the field. Then wild horse advocate Janine Dallow will be sharing some Modoc County documentation of wild horses and also heads up about a scheduled roundup that may be happening in September that we are trying to stop. And then there'll be some opportunities for everyone to take action. So first we'll begin with the wolves, just sharing some of IDA's efforts to campaign for wolves. We started a California Wolf Coalition. So many of you may not know about this because it's happening behind the scenes. We are meeting a couple times a month and strategizing to protect wolves as they begin to disperse through California. We also will be tabling at the International Wolf Symposium in October. And we did lobby for wolves during our lobby day, which we hosted for Activist Appreciation Month. We also just recently hosted a wolf research expedition to mitigate conflicts in Sierra Valley and also in Modoc County, and we'll hear more about that from Julia. And we've been supporting legislation. So we were thrilled that we had a triple victory in Arizona for wolves. We stopped 3 bad bills that would have impacted wolves in a negative way. We also are supporting the California Wildlife Coexistence Act, SB 1135, and you'll notice that we do have an active alert for this. This one is doing well. We're hearing, we just called the legislator this morning, and it looks as though it will pass. So fingers crossed on that one. If you haven't signed the alert, please do so. And you can also sign our active alerts. We have one to urge federal legislators to protect wolves, and Mary will help put that into the chat for everyone. We're also campaigning for wild horses, and here we have some images of horses that were rescued from the slaughter pipeline. So we're really thrilled to be working with advocates on the ground who are helping to raise funds and literally transport horses from danger where they're about to go to Mexico to be slaughtered, and instead they get rerouted through generous donations from IDA supporters and others to sanctuaries where they can live out their life. Now, I must say this doesn't happen for all horses that enter the slaughter pipeline, just the ones that we're able to rescue with your help. So we are campaigning for wild horses. We are submitting public comments to stop regional roundups. We've been documenting roundups. We have some blogs on our website about those roundups that we documented. We, as I mentioned a moment ago, we've been funding urgent rescues of wild horses when they're at auction before they get into the slaughter pipeline. We've also lobbied for wild horses during lobby days and will continue to do so. And we did host this expedition we hosted was wild horses and wolves. So we were able to help mitigate conflicts in Modoc County. And we have been supporting the SAFE Act, but we also want to close the slaughter loophole in the SAFE Act. And we do have an active alert that we would love for you to sign if you haven't already. And stay tuned for upcoming action alerts via email to stop 2 pending roundups for wild horses in Nevada and 1 to protect the Carter herd that Janine will tell you all about today. So thank you very much for joining us. We're excited that you're here. We hope you'll continue to support our work so that we can take action for wolves and wild horses. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Julia Orr, our wolf field researcher, who will share lots of very interesting insights from our travels.
Thank you, Lisa. And just give me a minute to share my screen. And I can't see anybody, so as soon as we start, just shout if you need to. So again, thank you for hosting IDA. Thank you for supporting the research into the wolf conflicts. I was lucky enough to, first of all, I want to caveat, I am no wolf biologist. I've been following the wolf issue and learning about wolves for the past 5 or 6 years. And so this is some of my findings with the support of IDA. I was lucky enough to connect with some folks up in the Sierra Valley when I first saw some really serious conflicts happening up there with wolves and ranchers. And this is mainly what this report is about. Let's see, does it want to move on? Oh, here we go. So gray wolves have returned to California and they've been naturally dispersing into California since 2011, following the arrival of Oregon wolf OR7, who was the first documented wolf in California in nearly a century. Since then, multiple satellite collared and uncollared wolves from Oregon have dispersed into California, and the Oregon wolves are dispersed from Yellowstone, their relatives from Yellowstone. And the first confirmed modern California wolf pack was the Shasta pack that was last observed in late 2015. And want to emphasize that wolf recovery is happening in California through natural dispersal and they have not been introduced, unlike in Yellowstone. So currently we have 12 confirmed wolf packs in California. The Ashpan, Diamond, Grizzly, Harvey, Ice Cave, Lassen, Tunison, Whaleback, Yowlamni, and the 3 new packs, the Interstate, White Horse, and the Ishi packs. The Whaleback pack and Harvey pack are the ones that are currently very active in depredations of cows and sheep. The active wolf populations in California, mainly in the northern and eastern parts of the states. Additional wolves might likely be present in other parts of the states, but they are not collared and they are generally dispersing individuals. And so the exact number of uncollared wolves remains unknown. Why this matters, as the wolf population expands into working landscapes, California faces the challenges of balancing wolf recovery, conservation, and protection. Also, the protection for farmed animals, which are mainly free-ranging cows and sheep, and rural community concerns, who are usually the ones who are on the ground facing wolf depredations of their farmed animals, and long-term coexistence strategies. It's a very contentious issue right now. And the purpose of our research and our visits were to better understand wolf rancher conflict, to protect the wolves, and observe hazing operations done by the CDFW, meet with ranchers, biologists, and residents, both pro and anti-wolf, and identify pathways for coexistence, and ultimately to protect the wolves. So our first trip was into the Sierra Valley in California in September the 25th to the 28th, and we just recently returned and spent a weekend there from June 11th to the 13th. We conducted interviews with ranchers, homesteaders, and a biologist. We observed CDFW operations, including drone hazing operations. And I want to add that this is not, you don't just drive up to these places and start interviewing people and start talking to people. These are very closed communities, very distrusting communities. So it was really fortunate that I was able to connect with somebody and talk with them and be introduced to people who were being affected by the wolves' presence and listen to their viewpoints. So my key findings were that there were a great deal of transparency gaps in wildlife data, and that was mainly due to the CDFW, whatever their reasons were for not sharing, but there are definitely transparency gaps. There were funding shortfalls for non-lethal deterrence. One of the prime problems was that the non-lethal deterrents weren't enacted quickly enough. So the wolves were already depredating on cows and sheep by the time the CDFW arrived in the field, which is generally thought by wolf biologists that that is too late. Once wolves have started hunting cows and sheep and they've got a taste for them, it's generally too late to try and stop them doing that. So this was a huge gap with the CDFW. There was a wild prey scarcity. We had heard that there was very few elk up there, and the deer population had diminished over the years, and there's no real scientific reason for that. It's probably due to wildfires decimating their homes and their food, hunting, and just a lack of forage due to climate change and things like that. So I haven't found any reports that really speak to that yet. There were also some issues with other predators being moved into that area from problem areas like Lake Tahoe. The ranchers were very frustrated with the compensation delays. Some of the ranchers had been waiting a year for compensation for the wolves who had killed some of their cows. But there was definitely an opportunity for collaboration. Even though they are very closed communities, they were very open to help and suggestions and support. So the wolf management challenges are many. There is a delay in the GPS and tracking information, so there is not real-time GPS information, I think mainly to protect the wolves. There are limited communications from the agencies. CDFW currently is not very good at communicating with people. Hopefully that will change with the new leadership. But they certainly don't seem to want to work with local nonprofits. And there was some speculation from the ranchers that not everybody was included in the communication. So there was a failing in the ranchers getting the information they needed, and that they were being reactive rather than proactive. So once the wolves had started depredating, then the agencies would react. But as most biologists know, you need to get in there before the wolves have really started to depredate on the cows and the sheep. And there was a lot of funding uncertainty. The most popular program was the drones, the use of the drones, which the CDFW would fly at night and haze the wolves. But that funding was coming to an end as I was just at the end of my first visit to the Sierra Valley. So that is something we really want to look to in supporting people who are having significant losses. From the rancher perspective, there were significant losses of cows and sheep, particularly in the Sierra Valley. This particular pack, the BMCO pack, was incredibly successful at outwitting a lot of the ranchers and the CDFW and killing cows and sheep. They were the most successful pack in California in doing that. There was a lot of emotional and financial strain from the ranchers' perspective. A lot of them were up all night chasing wolves up and down the valley. And as I said, most of the wolves were more intelligent and were able to circle back and kill cows and sheep as people were running around after them. There was support for coexistence when tools were effective and being used. A lot of the ranchers did express that they were willing to coexist if they had enough support and the effective tools to do that. And there was a huge desire for more transparency and timely support from agencies. When I interviewed one of the sheep ranchers, she had 43 sheep lost in 2.5 months, which is probably the biggest loss out of a lot of the depredations that the wolves had been doing in California. Her guardian dogs, she had guardian dogs, she felt they were under constant pressure and very stressed out. Their sheep were producing less quality and less productive in the wool, and there was a huge economic impact beyond the direct losses. I will state here that I am vegan, so I do not support any exploitation of animals in any way, but I was there to listen and to understand and to help protect the wolves. When we interviewed people who lived in the Sierra Valley, their concerns were the increased predator activity, not just by the wolves, but by mountain lions and bears. There was a lot of nighttime hazing disturbances. The CDFW would run up and down the valley at night using drones and trucks, and so they were often woken up at night with lights shining in their window and drones buzzing around their houses. There were great concerns over natural wolf prey scarcity, as I've mentioned before. This was mentioned quite a few times over the number of people that we interviewed. A lack of deer, concern for the elk population, which was just rebounding after wildfires. There was only probably about 5 or 6 elk known in that area. But there was still a desire for practical coexistence tools, and this is something that I did continuously hear. We also interviewed a wildlife biologist whose specialty was canines. She understood that wolves were now permanent on the landscape, but there was a predator-prey imbalance, and there was a desperate need for adaptive management tools. And again, there was definitely a support for science-based coexistence measures. So from an ecological context, the declining deer populations definitely contributed to the wolves preying on cows and sheep. There was an increased bear and mountain lion presence, as I mentioned before. Bears, problematic bears, and I say that in quotes, trash can bears who had been used to going into trash cans in Lake Tahoe were apparently being moved up into that area. So they were having a bearing on the declining deer populations as well. Although the wolves are filling a natural ecological role, there is a need to restore the prey base and habitat in order to deter wolves from predating on cows and sheep and becoming calls for, and the ranchers then calling for their elimination. We found pathways to coexistence could involve real-time data sharing to the ranchers who were involved, or not involved, but sharing that space with wolves, and a desperate need for long-term funding for drones and range riders. Range riders were also popular. We met one who was working in the Sierra Valley at that time. Improved compensation models, so faster compensation and increased compensation for ranchers, and a very cooperative research and innovative ways to deal with this. The recommendations for governance are to have regional coexistence councils in each area where the wolves are moving into, having small councils with tribal participation, local landowner involvement, so we could have some shared decision making and transparency for how to deal with the wolves depredating on cows and sheep. Um, as for the updated situation, unfortunately, a couple of weeks after our first visit in September, the BMCO pack had been so successful that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife authorized for the lethal removal of the adult wolves. In fact, 4 wolves were killed in October. The breeding female, the breeding male, an adult female, and a juvenile male was inadvertently killed during that lethal removal operation. And this was devastating for all of those people who were supporting wolf introduction and had been, seeing the BMCO pack, following this BMCO pack, and all of the other packs. This was the first time the CDFW had called for lethal removal of any wolves. So this move was really devastating. So there was a lot to be learned here. During subsequent capture, 2 juvenile wolves were located, and they were both dead. And I have not been able to find out the reasons for the death of the 2 juvenile wolves. And the removal of the pack effectively dismantled the BMCO pack less than 2 years after it was established. The loss of the breeding pair ended the pack's ability to reproduce and maintain its social structure. And so this incident highlights the importance of all of those things that I've talked about: early intervention, effective non-lethal deterrence, transparent conflict mitigation before situations escalate to what they did in the Sierra Valley, resulting in the killing of these amazing wolves. And I might add that the BMCO breeding female and male were both observed to be stunning, huge wolves, really intelligent, and could outwit. The ranchers talked about how they outwitted them a number of times. So genetically speaking, this was really devastating to have these wolves removed. So for recommendations, we would like to fund non-lethal deterrence, support drone equipment and training, continue outreach in conflict zones, build relationships with ranchers and tribes, and form a rapid response advocacy. So California has an opportunity to build a really great model of coexistence that protects wolves while recognizing and supporting the local communities who we may not agree with, but through transparency, trust, and proactive management. In our June follow-up visit, we returned to the Sierra Valley and the surrounding areas to assess conditions. We met with some of the same local stakeholders and gathered updates on the wolf activity. We had informal discussions with local ranchers and community members. We had a conversation with the sheep rancher we had previously talked to, who had been so affected by the wolf depredations. And we just had general observations throughout the Sierra Valley and surrounding areas. In that visit, there had been no new wolf depredations. The sheep rancher reported that they had no new sheep losses. The local residents did not see any wolves and stated that there were no wolves observed, no wolf packs observed, but the community concern around the wolves was significantly reduced. It's an important note that reflects the local observations and conversations conducted during that visit should not be considered a formal population assessment. We know that there are still wolves up in that area, but we don't know, they're not collared. So several of the local residents reported occasional sightings of a lone wolf outside the main valley, but as I said, that wolf was described as uncollared. There are no tracking information on the CDFW website. So, and we keep any locations private to protect the wolves, but there were no depredation conflicts associated with any of those reported sightings. And there may be wolf presence continuing in that region despite the loss of the BMCO pack, who had actually moved down from Lassen County themselves. So it's quite likely that other packs will move into that area. As one of the ranchers said, nature abhors a vacuum. So it is really important that we still stay on top of it and continue to try and find ways to coexist to mitigate any problems and any future killings of, any wolf packs. And so, what are the lessons learned following the removal of the BMCO pack? The community tensions appear to decline, but the ethical and the ecological questions remain around the lethal management. That remains unsolved. And certainly, we do not support any lethal removal of any wolves. But the questions remain, could earlier intervention and expanded non-lethal deterrence with appropriate funding have prevented the lethal removal of the BMCO pack? How can future conflicts be identified early enough and addressed before escalation? And what coexistence tools should be in place before new wars establish territories in conflict-prone landscapes where sheep and cows are free roaming? So we want to continue outreach and relationship building in Sierra Valley and the Modoc Valley, which we also visited, did not appear to have any wolf conflict areas at that time. We want to maintain dialogue. We want to support rapid deployment of non-lethal deterrence, and we want to advocate for transparent reporting of wolf activity, depredations, and management. And we want to prepare proactive coexistence strategies for future wolf recolonization events. So looking forward, it's a new chapter in wolf recovery in California, and I was so thrilled to find the BMCO03 female and her remarkable journey. She was originally, the BMCO pack was her natal pack. You may have heard of her. She's a female grey wolf. She was born in 2023 to the daughter of the breeding male and female. So she carries their phenomenal bloodline. She's currently undertaking one of the longest documented wolf dispersals in modern California history in search of a mate and territory, we think, because of course you cannot really know what a wolf is thinking. So she, as I said, originated in the BMCO pack when they were in Plumas County. In February, she traveled into the Neenach and Santa Clarita regions and became the first documented wild wolf in Los Angeles in more than 100 years. And in spring 2026, she turned back north again and moved through the Owens Valley into Inyo County. And in May 2026, she became the first known documented wolf in over a century to enter the Sequoia National Park. So her journey is incredible, and it just displays the extraordinary resilience of wolves, the continued natural recovery of the species in California, the importance of maintaining habitat connectivity across the state, and the need for proactive coexistence strategies before conflicts emerge. And she is our symbol of hope. The wolf story is still being written. We need to protect them, create landscapes where wildlife and humans can coexist and thrive together. So thank you very much for listening. There is some clips you can see of BAM03, but I don't think this is going to work. I'm not sure I have time to run it anyway. But this is her mother, gone but never forgotten. Thank you, everyone.
Wow, thank you so, so much.
If I can figure out how to stop sharing. Oh, here we go.
Thank you, Julia. We really appreciate your dedication and devotion to the wolves, and it takes a lot of courage to have those dialogues with
Mhm.
ranchers and to find some common ground so that we can establish some coexistence, because these are the people that live and work in the area, and we don't want them to instigate any further wolf killing. So
Mhm.
this kind of research is so important, and it will save lives. Well, thank you. And we will have questions. We have lots of questions, but we do have our next presentation for you on the wild horses. So we'll go ahead and ensure that we've got Janine up here with us too. Hi, Janine.
Hi,
Thank you so much.
everyone. So I will also try to share now. Okay, can everyone see that?
We can see. Yes,
Wonderful.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am here to talk to you a little bit about my observations of a specific wild horse herd. It's called the Carter Reservoir Herd Management Area, and which used to be part of a much larger area called New Year's Lake herd area. Um, so I'm just going to do just a very brief history about wild horses and their genetics. Wild horses are native to North America. The genus Equus caballus, which includes all modern horses, donkeys, and zebras, evolved on the continent millions of years ago. The species Equus caballus, which includes modern horses, also originated in North America and migrated back and forth into Asia and beyond via the Bering Land Bridge. Scientific evidence confirms the wild horses of North America today are the same species which evolved here. While colonial science traditionally purported a total extinction of the modern horse on this continent 11,000 years ago, updated science has closed that local extinction to 4,000 years, which is just a blink in evolutionary time. Also, very important to note is that many indigenous cultures maintain that the modern horse persisted here all along. This is, oh, let me go back to that last slide. So the reason I chose the four pictures that you see there, the horses in the upper left-hand corner are Soraya horses. The top right is the tarpan. The bottom left is one of the horses here, one of the Carter Reservoir horses. And then in the bottom right is a Przewalski horse. I can never pronounce that correctly. Um, this is a little bit about evolution. Nature knows what is best. In wilderness areas, wildlife populations are maintained through key natural processes, including predator-prey loops, habitat, resource availability, ecological succession, and connectivity, and genetics are determined by survival of the fittest. Whatever doesn't serve the species gets filtered out. And I say that because one thing I hear quite a bit when I go out and talk about wild horses or when I enter community, even here where I am in Northern California studying this Carter herd, locals here will say, oh, those horses are turnouts. They're feral horses. They're all the result of turnouts from ranches, domestic horses. But I believe very strongly that, in fact, because of this special situation which exists here, where there are natural processes still in place, this is a very remote area. I believe that these horses have gone through enough generations where nature has weeded out any of the unnecessary traits that might have been acquired through domestication. And I believe that what we are seeing now with this herd, I believe that it's the ancient genetics that are very predominant in this herd. This just talks a bit about political classification. Oh, there. The classification of wild horses. I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you still see am I still sharing the slideshow?
No, but we did see it before.
All right, I'm going to try to get back to it because I didn't know how to get rid of that. Let's see where it is. There. Now I can see.
Perfect.
Classification. It's the classification of wild horses carries serious implications for legal protection. Scientific evidence confirms the wild horses of North America today are the same species that evolved here. Many scientists and conservation groups classify wild horses of America as a reintroduced native species. Europeans classify horses as native North American species. The legal term used by the U.S. Congress in the Wild Horse and Burro Act is wild horses. Politics over science. The U.S. Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, often classifies wild horses as non-native, invasive species, or feral, and that is for purely political purposes. I'll rush through this slide, but the graphic on the left, minus the little hashtags, all of that lists all of the original herd areas that Congress designated for wild horses across the United States. When the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act of 1971 was signed by President Nixon, there were 329 wild horse and burro herds located on 53.8 million acres of public lands. And this graphic shows the red lines indicate which herd areas have been removed since 1971, resulting in less than 170 wild horse and burro herds remaining. So that's what's going on with the herd where I am, where it used to be a herd area called New Year's Lake, and now they've removed that and they shrank it down to the Carter Reservoir herd management area. This slide is just showing you that the BLM came up with this EA back in April of 2025. It's an environmental assessment, and it's basically the first step to removal of the herd as it exists. The reasons that they're giving are they're saying it's overpopulated. They come up with this population amount, they call it an appropriate management level. So the BLM, it's not based on science. The BLM says that the AML, the appropriate managed level for the horses in this area, is 25 to 35 horses. They're saying that the horses are using more than their allocated forage. The wild horses are damaging riparian areas and wetlands. Overpopulation is contributing to heavy trampling, damage of archaeological sites. That there's excessive year-round trampling, and that there's public safety hazards. They say all this, but they don't provide any evidence to back it up. Neither can they distinguish between any of the issues that they listed. They don't distinguish between things that are caused by wild horses versus the domestic cattle, which graze the same exact area where the horses are. This is just to give you folks an idea of where the horses are. So on the map on the left, that's the United States, and the little red arrow is showing to you where the Carter HMA is located in the very northeast corner of California. And then if you look at the graphic on the right, the purple, the magenta outline there, that's their original herd management area, the New Year's Lake herd area. And then the little tiny red outlined area, that's what they shrink it down to, calling it the Carter Reservoir HMA. And then to the west, it borders this really cool area called Surprise Valley. Surprise Valley runs north-south. On the left, you've got the Warner Range, mountain range of Modoc, and that's where there's black bears and there's been wolves. To the right of Surprise Valley is the Hayes Wilderness Range, which is much more of a high desert, sagebrush, and juniper. And then to the east of that is the Great Basin. You can go for 100 miles once you leave Surprise Valley. You go for 100 miles east till the next services. If you're out driving, it's all dirt roads. This is, again, the BLM rationale. I know that we're kind of short on time, but I think it's important for you to see in this that when they did shrink down the herd area from New Year's Lake down to Carter Reservoir, they redrew the lines and they did not include the only year-round water source, which is the New Year's Lake. This slide is just to show you that the biodiversity, the graphic on the left shows everything that's in the pink. Those used to be wild horse managed for horses, but are no longer. And then in the darker colors, those are where wild horses are still allowed to exist. But if you compare the same area from the left side of the screen to the right, you can see that the biodiversity where the Carters are and where New Year's Lake is very high. And that base map there on the right is from Oregon State University. They put together this SageCon landscape planning tool so anybody can access it online. The other big issue that is not only it affects all wild animals and our public lands are cattle grazing or livestock allotments on public lands. So the majority of the land here is public. And all these brown lines are the divisions amongst allotments, grazing allotments on public lands. So they're all fenced in. Even within the main brown lines you see, there's even more fencing because within an allotment, they might have different pastures. This just shows you the landscape of where the Carter Reservoir horses are. Upper left is that's New Year's Lake, that's the year-round. Upper right, that's Carter Reservoir, early spring, that's more of a seasonal water area. Lower left is down towards Surprise Valley on the west side of the herd area. It's much more arid. And also on the bottom right, that's also in Surprise Valley area. This is just a quick overview of the flora that exists because the biodiversity is so high. There's a lot of plants. This shows you the animals, and there are endangered and threatened species, even though the BLM claims there are not. There are endangered and threatened species within the herd area. All right, these are just some details on the Carter horses. So anyone, and I'm so excited that there's people from all over the world on this webinar today because these horses are just incredible. I've visited so many wild herds here, and I haven't seen any that display the genetics that these horses do. I'm not a geneticist, but I don't think you have to be to see that the horses have the dorsal stripe, they've got the shoulder capes, often they've got webbing, facial webbing, they've got these are all dun genetics, DUN. They come in buckskin dun, cream dun, bay dun. We've got red dun. There's all different combinations of dun. They've predominant markings include zebra stripes on their legs. And the plan right now, the BLM is planning to, starting September 1st, to round up the entire herd of horses. They estimate that on 300,000 acres of land, there are 470 horses of this herd. They plan to remove every single horse and only release 15 horses, randomly selected, and the females will all have been treated with chemical birth control. So I can't imagine that the horses are going to be able to survive for one thing, but also that the genetics that are displayed today will live on after that decimation. These are wild horses. They're not domestic. They thrive throughout the winter. They remain fat throughout the winter. They know how to find how to find forage. They are not domestic. They don't need to eat alfalfa and grains. They have a very varied diet. The BLM, in their reasoning and their rationale, they do not account. They say that the cattle are not part of the study, or that they don't, it's not necessary for them to look into who's causing the damage. But it's very clear. I'm out there almost every day, and I see a lot of damage done by the cattle. Public access was one of the, they're saying that the horses create safety hazard. Well, there's cattle on the road. There's fencing that does exists on the wrong side of the highway. This highway here is the southern border of the herd management area, and you can see the sign. It says there's no services for the next 100 miles. That's leaving Cedarville, California, heading into Nevada. Well, the only fence is on the wrong side. It's on the right side. It's on the south side of the highway, and the horses are on the left side. So that's just silly. And I've attended and documented many roundups. I know how horrific it is. I know how brutal it is on the horses. They run the babies. Mares may abort while they're running. Foals are, run until their little soft hooves fall off, because when they're newborn, their hooves are soft. And the whole thing with collaring the horses and the birth control just makes for very unnecessarily unnatural situations. This is my last slide. It says goals, advocacy goals. I think anybody that truly cares about wild horses and wolves and any other wildlife has got to push our government and governments around the world, I don't know, but manage public lands for wildlife over private industry. Because in fact, biodiversity affects everybody. I mean, we can all be as rich as we want to be, but without biodiversity, the world won't be here to support us. Biodiversity matters. Diverse ecosystems are Earth's life support system. Keep them wild. Advocate for natural processes on public lands. Predator-prey, community dynamics, and water cycle. We need to support these things. Prioritize public lands versus privatization of wild horses. I've heard at least one executive director of a very prominent wild horse advocacy group say to me that she thinks the solution is privatization of wild horses. She doesn't say that publicly, but that's what she said to me about 5 years ago. I don't believe that. Sanctuaries, to me, are for injured or abused animals who can no longer survive in the wild. And the access there is limited. Anybody that starts promoting privatization of our wild animals, people don't realize you're going to have to pay to go see them. It's going to become a zoo. I think we all need to advocate for wildlife crossings and wilderness connectivity. We must demand public lands be managed for multi-use in a democratic way, not satisfying the few. It's got to be what the majority of people want. We've got to focus on legislators because they're the ones who affect land management policies. People need to realize words hurt. I was growing up being told sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But that's not actually true. You can't use the word feral. Congressional designation is wild. Scientists use reintroduced native. Science recognizes wild horses as indigenous to North America, and so should we. Acknowledge and absolutely do not exclude the real possibility that wild horses never went extinct in North America. Nobody can prove that they went extinct. And in fact, as science progresses, they're disproving that they're shortening the time frame of the supposed extinction. So nobody should say that they went extinct. and there should be no blanket management statements. My fear is that there's folks down in Nevada that are very influential in the wild horse world, but often they use these blanket statements about that birth control is necessary, or that there's no healthy wild left, but that's not true. That every herd management area is different. Different herds have evolved. There's local adaptations specific to each herd. There's got to be more science done. I believe there's different diets, different adaptations to different herds and different ecosystems. And most importantly, we are stronger together. We've got to build bridges. I'm so grateful to have met Julia Orr and to be working more and more. I am actually working with different wolf groups because I see wolves trying to come down into the valley. And we've got to share data, find things that we have the same and things that are unique, and learn and discover before it's too late. And I'll stop there.
Wow. Thank you so much. This is incredible. You just for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, she's out there with these horses. She goes out every day and she's in a vehicle and she can see them in the distance and has spent lots of time documenting them through photographs and videos and has actual evidence to show that a lot of the claims by the BLM are false. So it's really an honor to have you here today, Janine, and also to have Julia here. I'm going to include, both of you because now is our time. We are at the close of our time today, but I'd love to extend for those who can stay with us for a few more minutes to entertain a few questions, if that's okay. I have been looking at the Q&A section. I see all of you are actively involved and have so many great questions. And thank you to Mary, who's pointed these out to us. So if you're willing, we'll spend a few more minutes and have a few questions. And really, thank you so much to our guests for being here and giving us their insight from the field. And I will say that I was one of the intrepid field attendants there with both of them and respect their work. So I think if you're okay, we'll go ahead and pick a couple of questions here. There's many of them, so we'll get to a few. Let's see. One of the questions are these free-ranging cattle, or cows, as we call them in defense of animals, and sheep ranging on private or public lands?
I can answer that a little bit. In Sierra Valley, it's private land.
For the cows? That's the
Cows and sheep.
question.
Yeah.
Oh, mine are public lands. It's public lands.
So that's a good example. We have one area private, another public. So we have probably to have different strategies protecting animals in both locations. So one question is fencing from the ranchers a problem with the lack of prey for wolves?
Yeah, they can answer that a little bit. Fencing is okay depending on the environment. Like in the Sierra Valley, there was just it's too big to fence effectively. And then you're going to have to look at, wolves can jump pretty high. So we're looking at 6 foot, 6 to 8 foot. And the environment there, it's very windy, and then they get deep snow. So it's very difficult to do fencing. There are some people have fencing with flaidry, which is the flags they put on them, that flap around and wolves freak out. But again, they get used to it after a time. So I think the answer is there is no one answer fit in it for everything. There's no blanket answer. So different tactics have to be introduced for different situations on private land.
And I think that in terms of fencing and its effect on the prey, I think it's a huge problem across the West. I looked up there um, hundreds of thousands of acres of barbed wire fencing carving up the West, and it has serious, anyone can Google the effect of barbed wire fence on antelope, pronghorn, even sage grouse. So it's a big issue for prey animals.
Mhm.
Thank you, Janine. And another question here is, do the ranchers who are compensated by taxpayers for animals lost to different predators, do they pay anything to use the public lands for their profit generating businesses?
Mhm. Yes, they.
So I can answer that. And up until this past year, the cost to graze a cow calf pair, that's how they term it. One cow and her calf costs $1.35 per month. They just raised that to $1.69 a month. Whereas if that rancher wanted to graze that animal on the same on private land, it's upwards of $20 a month. So they're heavily subsidized.
Thank you, Janine. Let's see. Then also, how this is one other question: how to increase the wild prey numbers to take pressure off of the the sheep and the cows that are involved in the ranching.
That's definitely, I'm not sure I can answer that effectively because I don't, I'm not a biologist. But one way that really is quite controversial and nobody's really addressed is to stop hunting. So stop hunting in that area until those animals have rebounded, and even stop camping and recreational activity in those areas till the deer and the elk have rebounded. So, if you've got like mountain bikers, campers, all in an area where they're disturbing deer reproducing, disturbing fawns and things like that, then you've got a problem with impacting an unknown problem, as far as I know, on your impact of how those animals are reproducing. So it's basically stopping human activity in the areas that you need those populations to rebound.
Can I add something? So I
Mm,
think that this is why this actual webinar is so exciting for me is because I believe that there's a real connection between the horses and the wolves. And
mm,
it's been shown, and there's scientific papers that say historically horses were one of the main preys for wolves. And
mm,
in fact, I live right next to Modoc and the Devil's Garden. I was there at Devil's Garden, heard wild horse territory. It's managed by the Forest Service. So the Forest Service um, manages wild horse territories, and the BLM manages uh, wild horse herd management areas. Anyway, what I want to say is that they've pummeled the Devil's Garden wild horse territory. They've removed so many of those horses, and at the same time, the instance of livestock predation has gone up, has jumped. And after the Devil's Garden Roundup, we went to visit the horses in holding, and a lot of the stallions that came in had really gnarly injuries, like scarring on them. I would love to get a scientist to go in
mm,
and look at those markings on the horse. I reached out to a gentleman who's in charge of one of the main rewilding groups in Europe, and I asked him about his observations. And in Europe, they see that the wolves really prey on the wild horses. So one thing I could say is stop removing the horses. I mean, I think wild animals serve as a buffer to domestic animals being preyed on. So I think there's a real connection there, but I think that the land management tries to hide it. I think that they actually don't want there to be reasons to support the wild horses. So that's my little plug there.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you so much. One question is, were there any attempts to prevent the killing of the male and female breeding pair of the pack that was discussed, the Sayo?
Um, I'm not sure. I think that there were some groups like the Center for Biological Diversity who were working behind the scenes, trying to do as effective management as possible. But I think that decision was probably made behind closed doors because it was so contentious. And it happened within a couple of weeks of us being up there and really understanding what was going on. And so there was literally no time. They did it all so secretly. But I don't really know who was trying to work to stop that happening.
Well, I think some of the efforts that were done with the first investigation, Julia, some of your having conversations with the local ranchers, that was an effort to
Mm,
have those bridges built to prevent the killing of these wolves. So
yeah,
I think that the more these sorts of bridges are built and become stronger, and then we can have a faster response
yeah,
by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to respond to the concerns of the ranchers, then this may have shifted the whole
yeah.
dynamic, and the it could have saved these wolves. So
Yeah, and that goes to the transparency. Like the wolves started heavily depredating. Now I might have my months a little askew, but I think it was around March. The CDFW didn't respond. They had people in the field who didn't understand the environment. They weren't used to being there. They didn't understand wolves. There was a lack of training. So there was a couple of months where the wolves were depredating and nothing really was happening. So by the time that they'd figured out to get drones in the field, the first drones weren't working, got a second bunch of drones, they started really working. It was months down the line, and it was months down the line till we figured out what was happening because it was starting to be very vocal and public on Facebook. But that goes to the transparency. As soon as there's an issue, everybody should be jumping in. There should be an active effort to get in front of those wolves depredating before any lethal removal. And I have to say, I was very clear to everybody that I spoke to that I would never and would never advocate for lethal removal of any wolves. It's just not on the table.
thank you for clarifying that, Julia. Um, just a couple brief questions, and then we'll close for today. I know would love to be able to get to all of them. There's so many excellent ones. Um, one, is it considered normal for public lands to be privatized for the benefit of the farmers or ranchers and their animals that they are selling by driving out their natural inhabitants, the natural animals that would live in the area?
I'd say, Janine.
Well, I more and more information is coming out right now, especially with everything going on with public lands at threat. And yeah, that's a theory is that they are that is the end goal because I think there was a big push to privatize the public lands, and the way I've heard it that makes sense is that, well, if they can't do that because there was such pushback from the American public, that another way to do it is to make it so that it's just not attractive to other people, or it just becomes they're actually right now they're in the process of redoing all the grazing um, laws, regulations, and at the last public meeting here in February, they're talking about removing this entire horse herd. At the same meeting, they're saying that they're going to start increasing the grazing period from 6 months to 12 months to create flexible seasons of use. So they're basically letting the ranchers be in charge of the public lands. And even though they're public lands and anyone can go out there, it's scary to go out there because you'll have to open up gates. undo like sometimes people lock them up, but anyway, it's very I don't know, I think it's just not going to end well unless people really speak up for public lands.
Mm.
Thank you, Janine, for giving us the inside scoop on what's going on there. And we do want to speak up for the public lands. We have sent in a comment from In Defense of Animals to the government regulation site. This is so important right now as there's a shifting going on with all kinds of regulations related to wild animals and public lands. So a couple questions that are just like one kind of related. One is, how can we stop this? Are there any organized attempts to prevent the BLM September plan from reducing the Carter Reservoir herd? And also another comment on there may be a new attempt to reduce or eliminate the Devil's Garden herd.
So there is one lawsuit underway on behalf of the Carters. I'm not part of the lawsuit. I, on my own as an individual, I went through the channels and I got as far as filing an appeal. And that was over a year ago and they haven't responded. And I know that other people that have filed appeals against horse roundups and they horse roundup occurred anyway, and that those people never even heard back from the government on their appeal. So it's just silly. It's just like screaming into the wind. So I'm hoping to work with In Defense of Animals to come out with an alert because to me, this is about democracy. Anyone, all my research shows that the majority of Americans support wild horses on public lands and that it's a small minority that want them off. Yet the minority seems to be in charge.
The minority who wants them off.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we are in the thick of it here with the wolves and with the wild horses, and In Defense of Animals will do everything that we can to protect these really important key species on the landscape. And stay tuned for some alerts to sign and also some emails that will be about the upcoming roundups in Nevada and specifically with the Carter Reservoir herd. And stay tuned to our work to try to protect the wolves as well as they continue to disperse in California. I want to thank everyone for being here today. We can see your passionate group with so many questions, and we will send out a replay with contact for both Janine and Julia. If you have further questions, you can ask them. And we're so delighted and honored to have both of you here today as experts in the field, literally in the field, like in the field with the grasses on the ground. And and so just wanted to mention that as well. We did also visit an area in Reno with some horses that are being denied their water. Um, there's a need for all of our advocacy, for each one of us to take action in our own way to look to see which are the herds in your area that you might be able to protect, or join a local advocacy group to do protests. We work with grassroots groups all the time um, to initiate, whether it's a protest or a research or relationship building or lobbying. We try to support everyone in their work. So thank you to those people who've joined today. Stay tuned for the replay and with more resources from Janine and Julia. And please and do sign our alerts to help. That's one way we can help to reach decision makers. And thank you, Janine and Julia and Mary. I
Sure.
appreciate all of you today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. You're amazing to show up in all the work that you do. Thank you, Janine, IDA.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. I can't thank everyone enough for caring. Thank you.
Yeah, truly it is the caring that counts. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And please keep in your mind and your heart the horses and the wolves, and we'll be out there advocating for them.
Definitely.
Take care, everyone. Bye now. Yay.